Hello and welcome to the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette's Pitt Mailbag Show. Here we are, your Pitt beat writers, Chris Carter, Stephen Thompson, as always, coming to you on a Tuesday. Even on Christmas Eve, we bring you your presents of answering your mail. Hope you sent your letters to Santa, but your questions to us. So, as always, you can find the show in your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoyed. Subscribe to this channel to get all the daily content that comes out from all of our sports writers here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, as well as our Tuesday episodes of the Tuesday Mailbag Pitt Show here. For the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Stephen, it's Christmas Eve, and there's a lot to talk about. There's football. The Pitt has its bowl game coming up the day after Christmas. The GameAbove Sports Bowl. Pitt basketball has finished its non-conference schedule. Pitt volleyball lost in the Final Four again. But it kind of feels interesting to be talking about this Pitt football team from a completely different light from where they were just a month and a half ago. When there was a lot more life in the season of this team.
Yeah, we're talking about how they can kind of salvage a season as opposed to make the most out of it, as we were, back in September or October. But that's just kind of where this team is now. So you're fighting to end the season on a high note instead of, be one of these teams that's competing in the playoff or, competing for a conference championship like they were early in the month. But at the end of the day, they got one more game to play and one more opportunity to watch this 2024 team that was certainly interesting, if not everything that we had hoped that they would be at the beginning of the year.
No, yeah, I think it certainly was interesting. There's a lot of things that happened. They went from 7-0 to 7-5. A ranked team that was starting to get up in the conversations for like, hey, if they do enough, could they make the college football playoffs? That quickly went away in early November. But let's get to some of our questions here. We do have some to address here. C. Michael from X asks, any chance we see Julian Dugger? Probably won't play the whole game, but I think it would be bizarre to not have him play a series or two. Now, for those who are the uninitiated, Julian Dugger is the freshman quarterback that they got from Penn Hills, was really good in Whippeal as a quarterback there. We really haven't seen him at all this season, really that much. He's been kind of just on the shelf there, as expected for a freshman quarterback. But Steven, like one thing, like Julian Dugger, just watching him in high school, he's a good athlete, but I think he has a long way to go as far as processing. But the thing is that Eli Holstein probably not going to play in this game because he got hurt late in the season. And Nate Yarnell transferred. So now you're down to what? Jake Frannell?
David Lynch. Narduzzi said that David Lynch would be the starter if Holstein can't go. Yeah.
David Lynch is probably your guy there. And maybe you do see Dugger. Maybe if they don't have things and David Lynch, but what do you think that there's a chance that you see Dugger worked in at all just because of his athleticism, and maybe it just gives them something else?
There's a chance, but I would think that Pitt is more intent on winning this game, and so if Dugger gave them the best chance to win, then he would have been mentioned ahead of David Lynch, like Pat Narduzzi's kind of maintained, over those last few weeks of the regular season when they were dealing with injuries to Eli Holstein and even Nate Yarnell, but. Dugger hasn't really come up at all in those conversations. And like you said, he's a true freshman, so that's not a knock against him. I think every true freshman quarterback, unless you're, Jameis Winston or some other, incredibly talented high school recruit, needs some time to develop. Even guys like Arch Manning, don't leap over veterans that quickly. So, Dugger probably just needs a little bit more time. I think Pitt's probably just more comfortable with how David Lynch operates the offense. I think Pitt's motivations here are to win this game and to end the season on a high note, more so than, getting freshmen or new guys or anyone like that into the games. They've had a lot of practice time, so I don't think it's impossible that Dugger, has maybe shown something that the Pitt staff wasn't able to see from him earlier in the season. But I would expect that if Holstein can't go, it'd be David Lynch the whole way through.
I could see that as well. They want to stick to something, and especially when you have young guys at quarterback that don't have a ton of experience, you kind of want to let them get into the groove of a game. And when you're mixing them in and out, it keeps them from being able to do that. Certainly a case there. Let's talk about this game. Ben asks via email, what are your predictions for Pitt Toledo in the bowl game? it's tough because, there's always the transfer portal. There's the impact of things. Neither of us really know what David Lynch is going to do at quarterback for certain. But I do think that there's some expectations you could still have for Pitt, especially from its defense, because it looks like the Sharks are going to play. The linebackers will still be flying around. I think that you could expect something there. But Steven, in just looking at Toledo, this is a team that did score a decent amount of points in the MAC. They averaged just short of 27 points per game, but they were the number one passing team in the MAC when it came to total yardage, 246.2 passing yards per game. Is that something that Pitt should be very alert about in this game? Is because I think that it's one thing to lose to like, UCLA in the Sun Bowl, which they did not do. But losing to the MAC at the end of the season, a MAC team at the end of the season, I feel like would just be the ultimate sour note to how this season just completely fell off the rails.
Yeah, of course. I mean, you should never, as a power conference team, you never want to lose to a MAC team. And I think losing to anyone in your bowl game, losing 6 in a row in any context is not fun and not ideal. And to do that to a team from a lesser conference is, even more concerning. But the thing I'd be most concerned about with Toledo, I mean, they're a defense that's, was 32nd in the country, allowing over 21 points per game. They put up some impressive numbers in their only other game against a power conference opponent offensively. They scored 41 points on Mississippi State, but also held the Bulldogs to 17 points. So they haven't allowed more than 24 points over their last 3 games of the season. The defense, I think, is what I'd be more concerned about, especially when there are questions about who your starting quarterback is going to be. And I wouldn't expect to, I don't know if Kanate Mumfield's declared for the draft, but I'm expecting that he won't play in this game. That's Pitt's leading receiver. You'll get Desmond Reed back, but you've also still got kind of the revolving door at offensive line. So
yeah.
A lot of questions on offense still. I would be more worried about what this Toledo defense can do, especially in the secondary. They've got some opportunistic defensive backs. Thinking about Maxon Hook, the safety, Brandon Alls, the cornerback. Those guys have combined for 5 interceptions this year. There's 2 other Toledo players with multiple interceptions. So this is a defense that I think could take advantage of a struggling Pitt offense. And that's the thing that I think would be more disappointing to see if Pitt can't pick things back up on offense.
Agree. They need to be able to do something on offense, whether it's run the ball, pass the ball. And look, Capel's offense is supposed to give decisions to your quarterback. I know that David Lynch is exactly the quarterback that you dreamed of having there. But you got to create simple looks for this guy, things that can be easy reads, get you down the field, get the ball moving. And if Pitt can get playing fast and play their style and maybe wear down Toledo, maybe they can get them, kind of huffing and puffing, and a little tired in the second half. If Pitt can do that, they have a chance in this game. With that being said, Steven, what's your bowl prediction for this game?
Yeah, I'm not particularly optimistic until we hear something better about Eli Holstein. I would expect that Pitt does not end up winning this game. I think the defense will obviously keep them in it, but this is a well-coached Toledo team, a Toledo team that's already beaten a power conference opponent on the road, an SEC team, like I've said. I haven't seen much from Pitt that indicates that they will win. I don't know if I could give you a score prediction. I don't think it's going to be particularly high scoring. I'd say that Toledo maybe scores 20 points, but this could be a game where Pitt only scores, 14 or 17.
I'm kind of with you in that it'd be one thing if Pitt had a really good run game and their offensive line was kicking butt to kind of give them a reprieve with their quarterback situation. But they don't have that. They have a really talented running back. They have playmakers on offense, but I have a hard time seeing Pitt's offense get it in gear. I think Pitt's defense has shown that, if you can just simply throw the ball a little bit around, you can get enough points. And that's where I kind of agree with you. I'm going to say I think Toledo actually wins this game 24-20. I think Pitt's got to show that they can snap out of the funk that they've been in for 2 months now. And they haven't been able to show that. And if they show that, kudos to them and great. But I think Pitt football, if they win, good for them. We'll break that down next week. But right now it's hard to pick this team with how, how poorly they've played game in and game out. Even when they start hot, they cool off so fast, and then things just fall apart on them. So we'll see where that happens. Steven will be in Detroit covering that game for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Let's shift to Pitt basketball here. We have a question from Tristan, who asks, should Zack Austin or Damian Dunn start at the 3 once Dunn returns from injury in league play? Now, just to clarify, Damian Dunn, of course, was the starter at the start of the season. As I understand it, his window, the 6-week window when he got injured, should end on the 3rd of January. So the Friday after their game against Cal, opening up their full ACC schedule. That doesn't mean he's going to be able to play right after that. That just means that Pitt probably expects to be able to start evaluating him there. But Steven, you and I have talked about how Zack Austin's played very well for Pitt. I feel like his presence needs to be on the floor as a starter right now.
Yeah, I think I'm partial to that too. Austin has been, outstanding not only defensively, but he's taken a step forward offensively that if you watched him all last year, you didn't know if that was possible. I mean, he is blowing away his career numbers for, as far as shooting the ball from 3. He's up north of 40% this year, and still, I think even took a step forward in terms of his defense. He's a much better on-ball defender this year, and that comes in addition to all of the ridiculous blocks that you know and love him for. But I think he's also picking his spots with those blocks more. He's not blocking as many shots as he was at one point in his career, but I think he's being smarter about when he tries to go for those rejections, because it's not always, even if you do get that block, sometimes it can put your team in an unadvantageous position if you just reject your shot and the ball is flying around. So Austin, I think, is making a lot of great decisions offensively. He's improved his shooting. He's confident. And then that comes with, a bit of a step forward defensively as well. So that's why I'm in on Austin. I think even when Dunn does return, like you alluded to, he's going to need a minute to kind of get back up to speed. It'll depend on what Pitt needs. Damian Dunn is, I think, the better offensive option, even if, Austin has taken a step forward. So, if we get to around, that Duke game on January 7th or, Louisville on the 11th, which I think those are probably the 2 games that you should look at as to when Dunn should be just about ready to go. If the Pitt offense is sputtering, and it's not, they're not scoring enough points, then I'd expect Dunn to kind of take the majority of those remaining minutes. But if it's the defense that's struggling, then obviously you got to have Zack Austin in there. So it'll be interesting to see. I think this is a good problem for Pitt to have, 2 guys who are capable of starting and playing those minutes. And I think you could also maybe look into, whether or not Cam Corrin or Guillermo Diaz-Graham is giving you what you need at those positions. And you could kind of decide in that moment, we need more of one guy or the other. Or we need to go smaller and have our bigs in there less, play with one center as opposed to, or play Austin at the 4 instead of having the extra big out there. That's something that Jeff Capel's also talked about is, just because you're not one of the first 5 guys on the floor doesn't mean that you're not going to play 30 plus minutes a game and play starter level minutes. To me, it's always more important about who you close with in a close game as opposed to who you start with.
Agreed there entirely. I think that when you look at how Pitt wants to play, they have depth this year. That's something that goes in the Panthers' favor. And I think they could also be developing depth. You and I watched Amsel Dalic, I think, play maybe his best game this past week. Where he was able to come in, have some good passes. Granted, against a lesser opponent, Sam Houston isn't some superstar that they beat on a Saturday, but I do think that there's a developing rotation there, and I think Zack Austin has found his place in the starting lineup. But it'll be depend on what do you want structurally to be part of your starters. What do you want at the start of the game? Jeff Capel seems to want a ball handler, a guy that can put the ball on the floor, create for others and create for themselves. And Damian Dunn can at least give you that with a mid-range game, right? But at the same time, if Zack Austin's hitting threes for you, spacing the floor out, giving you good defense, those are different things. But again, like you said, that's a good problem to have, because I'd rather have that than be wondering which one can even give you anything on the floor.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you can't Damian Dunn, I think we all know him for that mid-range game, but I think he's also been their best shooter by three-point percentage. Yeah, he's shooting 52.6% from three, albeit in some limited action, but taking a little over 2.5 threes per game and making half of them. That's pretty good too. So he was their third leading scorer. It's something that they have missed at times. They've kind of leaned on their defense at other points. The three-point shooting hasn't always been what Pitt has wanted out of this season. So it'll be interesting, but it's also not a bridge that Pitt has to cross until later in the season.
Absolutely. Let's talk about this question from Brent here, who emailed this to us. Brent asks, Pitt's now ranked 11th in the net. What did Jeff Capel do differently this year compared to last year outside of just win? Now, Stephen, you and I talked about this, a lot. Leading up to this year, as far as like how they need to handle things, how scheduling could work. And then we talked to Jeff Capel about this last week leading up to the Sam Houston game, kind of about the scheduling. At that point, they were ranked, I think, 9th in the net, and looking at what they had done there. But Stephen, Jeff gave us, I think, some concrete answers talking about this. He talked about how, they've beaten a lot of their mid-major opponents. They're in the upper part of the Horizon League, or the name whatever else league that they're in, instead of in the bottom part of it. They made sure that the only team that's even close to the 300s in their net rankings is VMI, and they went off trends to find it. Steven, it just seems interesting that Pitt has, at least this year, gamed the system a bit, because where Pitt fans were so frustrated and confused why they were ranked so low down below teams that they beat and had better records than last year. Here they are sitting at 11th in the net. Who's 13th? But Mississippi State, who destroyed Pitt, has a better record, has more quad one wins, and yet Mississippi State's behind Pitt somehow in those rankings. Do you have more thoughts on how Pitt handled this situation?
Yeah, the improvements that they made were kind of on the margins. So there's really only one huge difference in terms of how Pitt. There's one huge difference, and then there's another, I think, smaller difference that you kind of alluded to. The first one was just adding Ohio State. That road game at Ohio State is going to carry them a long way, especially after Ohio State blew out, I think beat by 15 points, Kentucky, who was a top 5 ranked team over the weekend. So that was huge, just getting a road game against a power conference opponent, and one that looks like it's going to have a chance to make the NCAA tournament. That was really big. But then also, like you said, scheduling some mid-major opponents that had some quality to them. These are teams that are ranked, in the top half of KenPom, as opposed to, like you said, the 250s or the 300s of the net or the KenPom or something like that. And Capel explained that they looked at, when they were building that part of the schedule, those non-power conference games, they looked at 4-year trends to tell you, where these programs have been over the past few years, and kind of historically. You can't exactly predict what all of these teams are going to look like at the end of the year, but you can make an educated guess. And so Pitt pulled a Murray State out of there, which I think is ranked in the top 150 of KenPom, and I assume the net as well. Same thing goes for Sam Houston State. So who even though Pitt beat them pretty handily, they're a pretty quality team. They won the regular season championship in the Conference USA last year. I want to say Radford, who they played in the season opener, is also off to a decent start. So it's just kind of making sure that you're not just stacking wins, but that you're able to do them against, even if you're going to play some mid-major or low-major teams, that they are quality relative to their station in the sport. And the other thing is they started beating these teams by like upwards of 20 points, sometimes even upwards of 40 points. So the margin of victory also matters a lot to the net too. It's the net's all about performance relative to the average D1 team. And, beating from someone by 40 is above average, no matter who that is.
I think that's the thing, is that when you look at it, and I think one thing that when you look at the Mississippi State's margin of victory in some of their games, they've barely beaten some of those opponents, and they've by 7 here and there. And I think that that's something that Jeff Capel has embraced. And I know people have been wondering, hey, why hasn't Pitt sent in more of their backups late in the games? I think Jeff's had a kind of a strategy. No. We need this game to be like by 30. This doesn't need to be a 15-point win. This needs to be 20, 25, 30 points there, because you stack up, 4 or 5 of those types of wins, they go in your favor. And right now, like if you look at that at the net right now, as far as Pitt's games, they have 4 quad 1 wins, 3 quad 3 wins, and 2 quad 2 wins. They only have their 2 losses are quad 1s, and they have a quad 1 win. Looking at that, those quad 3 wins, all of those being by larger margins, help Pitt, and I think it shows that this year they kind of gamed the system a little bit better than they did last year. Now, granted, Jeff Capel, I think, kind of gave an explanation a little bit when he was talking about it. He talked about how last year they had 2 freshmen. They knew that was going to be tough. And they had, Zack Austin was the transfer from the Big South. Ishmael Leggett was from the Atlantic 10. So they weren't entirely sure how the season was going to look early. So maybe they scheduled too weak of opponents with those mid-majors early on, because those teams from the smaller conferences were having nets in like the low 200s in the 300s, and that ultimately did not help their non-conference strength of schedule. But this time around, that is not an issue, and Pitt seems to be capitalizing on it.
Yeah, and the other thing is, I mean, like the West Virginias of the world that they played are better than they were last year.
Yes.
LSU is a more quality opponent than Oregon State, like they played last year. Same goes for that Florida game didn't really affect them, but yeah, adding that Ohio State game and playing Mississippi State instead of a Missouri, that helped as well. So all this stuff, some of it was outside of Pitt's control. I think very little of it was actually in their controls, besides, the margin of victory and maybe, gaining a little bit more of a quality opponent, in their kind of mid-major or low-major games.
Absolutely. He's Stephen Thompson. I'm Chris Carter. We hope that you all have a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year and Happy Holidays to everyone out there that celebrates all the different things going on right now. Stephen will be headed to the GameAbove Sports Bowl in Detroit. I'll be covering Steelers Chiefs with our Steelers crew here on Christmas Day, but there's plenty of action to get to. And I think that there's a lot to talk about. We'll keep breaking it down here on the Pitt Mailbag Show week after week. You'll see us next week before New Year's, as we probably talk more about that bowl game, where Pitt's transfer portal status is at, and how the Pitt basketball team looking heading into their big New Year's Day start, where they play Cal on New Year's Day at the Peterson Event Center. From Chris Carter and Stephen Thompson, thanks again for watching the Pitt Mailbag Show. We'll be back on your screen and in your ears next week. Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all of the sports coverage the Post-Gazette has to offer, visit post-gazette.com.